La Federación de Rusia.
Благодарю вас,
Thank you,
господин председатель.
Mr. President.
Мы выражаем
We
благодарность
wish to
госпоже
extend our
Розмари
gratitude
де
to
Карло
Madam Rosemary DiCarlo,
и приветствуем
and
министра
we
иностранных
welcome
дел
the Foreign
Венесуэлы
Minister
Хорхе
of
Ариасу в
Venezuela,
этом
Jorge
зале.
Ariaso, in this hall.
Я
I
полностью
fully agreed with, I would have agreed with my German colleague that the topic for today's meeting should have been threats to international peace and security, threats to Venezuela by a host of states. But I think that, in fact, this is an issue which should be called differently. Today, we should discuss a situation not within Venezuela, but around Venezuela. Today, we are once again present at another act of a spectacle that the United States has created around Venezuela. For those who are distracted, I will briefly recall the content of the previous series. The previous episodes. In an independent Latin American country, there's an imposter friend that turned up, and on the streets he proclaimed himself to be president of the country, and immediately, several minutes later, was acknowledged as such by the United States of America. The European and a number of Latin American countries hesitated, and then they too acknowledged this individual as president. The legitimate leader of the country, Nicolas Maduro, in the view of this group of countries, won during the elections last spring in an unfair way because the opposition boycotted them. The fact that Washington itself incited opposition leaders to withdraw from the election naturally has not been publicized. I think that those who are now expounding on the constitutional process and the legitimacy of the authority of Guaido on the basis of the Venezuelan constitution understand that they sound hypocritical and legally null and void. It's a mockery. What we observe is trampling upon the law and constitutional rights. Are you not ashamed of saying this? Do you not understand that it's clear, in any event to all, not a single self-respecting jurist or a judge would sign on to this mockery, this disrespect for law as such? At least read the legal conclusions of the German Bundestag and its legal service. Everything there is clear. In parallel, there are moans and groans about the horrific economic situation in Venezuela, starving civilians and skyrocketing prices. And it is said that Venezuela needs to be saved at any cost for the sake of its own citizens. The fact that this country has, since 2013, been targeted by American sanctions, which largely are the reason for the current economic situation in the country, is, of course, hushed up. The fact that the overall damage to the country's economy as a result of the sanctions amounts to $345 billion, of course, is also passed over in silence. And now what we have is that the situation around Venezuela has brought to a boiling point, and Washington is blaming President Maduro for all the ills in the country and organizing an operation entitled the Delivery of Humanitarian Assistance. Its culmination occurred 23 February when in Cucuta, Colombia, an unverified American cargo reached the area, which was not requested by the authorities, and there was an attempt to illegitimately transfer this illegally to a neighboring state using civilians as human shields. The legitimate authorities of Venezuela are performing their duties for the protection of the state border. They've mobilized their security forces, who implemented a sole objective to ensure the inviolability of the border. Video images of what took place clearly show that people moving from Colombian territory were aggressive, and they initially provoked Venezuelan military personnel and troops who were on duty. At that point, the first victim from among the demonstrators emerged. The individuals informed in vehicles rammed into the Venezuelan side and quickly rammed the blockades on the Colombian side. This reckless act has been seen on the video images which have been published on social networks. They have no doubt that as a result, there have been wounded and possibly dead. But the victims and dead from the hands of the regime and its bloodshed is now being touted all over the media outlets. The deliberate ramming of individuals in any other part of the world is categorically classified as terrorism. However, in Cucuta, it is viewed as the heroism of deserters who have challenged the authorities, and Guaido approvingly pats these heroes on their backs. The so-called humanitarians on the themselves to set a truck ablaze. The world has seen images of one of the demonstrators on Colombian side, deliberately or not, throwing a flaming bottle, which failed ultimately to cross the bridge. So, based on all accounts, on 23 February, we observed an attempt of an attempted illegal state border crossing for the delivery of unknown cargo. Dear colleagues at the Security Council, which of your countries would act any differently under those circumstances? One country even wants to build a huge border on the a huge wall on the border of another country to prevent an illegal border crossing. How is this not reminiscent of 1986, when humanitarian assistance for Nicaragua turned out to be an arms consignment to the Contras units? Today, we have in this connection, we have potent and obvious deja vu that has arisen. Let's call a spade a spade. This is not humanitarian assistance. If the U.S. were genuinely to wish to help the Venezuelan people, then they would have operated through any of the UN agencies accredited in that country, as has been successfully done by other countries. For example, the Russian Federation last week delivered 7.5 tons of medical goods to Caracas. We did so through the World Health Organization, and we were not met with any obstacles. And moreover, the Venezuelan authorities are willing to receive the necessary humanitarian technical assistance necessary for the country. In order to work on the basis of that, it is necessary to provide opportunities and unblock opportunities for Caracas to carry out payments for the delivery of food and medicine that is necessary. However, Americans and allies do not wish to act legitimately. They have another goal. One simply cannot call that humanitarian. What took place on Saturday was reminiscent not of assistance, but what is called forced feeding in the United States. For the uninitiate, this is a form of torture. Apparently, having trained on their detainees in Guantanamo, the U.S. authorities now decided to force feed a whole country. If you think that the United States and their allies had the right to act this way, then take a look at General Assembly Resolution 46-182. It set out the normative legal framework for international humanitarian assistance. My colleague, the German permanent representative, has just listed nearly all of the principles of humanitarian assistance, but he overlooked a very important one. It explicitly states in the implementation of humanitarian activity, I quote, "It is necessary to respect the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national unity of states must be fully respected in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations." Then it states, in this context, the humanitarian assistance should be provided with the consent of the affected country and, in principle, on the basis of an appeal by the affected country. Was there such a request? No. Now, we would like to thank all colleagues from UN agencies and their partners from major humanitarian organizations for having refused to support this political provocation. We demand that there be an end to violations of UN General Assembly resolutions, for there to be respect for the sovereignty, borders, and national unity of the people of Venezuela in line with the UN Charter, instead of hypocritical attempts to introduce $20 million of assistance. Is necessary to immediately unblock the accounts of Venezuelan state businesses in the United States for $11 billion. Those which have been allocated for the government to receive medicine, food, and basic necessities. And what about the assets of the PDVSA Corporation? $7 billion. And what about Venezuelan gold in the United Kingdom? $1.2 billion. Washington and London just recently stole $30 billion from the Venezuelan people in oil and bank assets. Let's call a spade a spade. We have an evident, arrogant theft of a sovereign country, their attempts to bring it down to a state of destitution in order that a humanitarian intervention, and responsibility to protect, which are not acknowledged in international law, to do so and to oust an inconvenient regime. And then people ask, why do Russia and other countries object to such noble concept? The response is clear. Were there not many examples of this in Latin America alone? You have a quote as follows from a U.S. historian, Harry Stout. In its history, the United States have participated in 280 military interventions and nuclear standoffs on every corner of the globe. And then, quote, America's faith in the institution of war as a divine instrument and sacred mandate to be exercised around the world, unquote. I turn to those countries who supported the self-proclaimed so-called President Guaido. Are you truly so naive? Do you really believe that you are immune to this? Have you not heard statements from a U.S. leader that Cuba and Nicaragua are next in line? Does it seem to you that you will not be next? But this is not just a warning to them. This is a warning, a word of caution to all who refuse to play by Washington's rules. And you, those who support Washington in this, are complicit in the violation of both the UN Charter and international law, and perhaps, God forbid, an armed intervention, which in words you categorically object to. We specifically fail to understand why neighboring Colombia, a neighbor of Venezuela, instead of dealing with the plethora of domestic problems for the implementation of the final peace agreement, why did it decide to throw its full force behind this misadventure against its neighbor? This cannot be disappointing because Colombia itself just recently extricated itself from a protracted civil war, the repercussions of which will take a very long time to surmount, and there have not yet been any guarantees of a lasting peace that have arisen. Incidentally, during difficult times for Colombians, Venezuela opened up its borders for more than 5 million refugees, many of whom continue to reside in that country. We wish to caution against reckless steps to implement a military scenario in Venezuela, which we increasingly hear about. This is liable to have dire, unpredictable consequences both for the region and the world. We beseech all states in the region, regardless of political affiliations, to firmly voice and extend support for the UN Charter, a rejection of threat and use of force, and egregious intervention in domestic affairs of a sovereign state. We reiterate again and again, a resolution to Venezuelan problems is exclusively the right, purview, and responsibility of the Venezuelan people themselves, and they need to exercise this right without provocative intervention from abroad. International, regional assistance, above all, should be geared towards seeking ways to resolve the tumult in that country with full respect for its sovereignty and territorial integrity. For this reason, we welcome the goals set out and adhered to by the participants of the Montevideo Mechanism, Mexico, Uruguay, Bolivia, and the CARICOM countries. For our part, we stand ready to deliver assistance in seeking such a mutual understanding among all constructive and patriotically minded forces in Venezuela, especially given that the Venezuelan authorities call for and stress the imperative importance of domestic political dialogue. The chair of the National Assembly, Guaido, instead of discussing possibilities for dialogue and national reconciliation, calls upon states to keep a military scenario on the ready. It's hard to call such calls responsible conduct of a politician who cares for his people and his country. Mr. President, the humanitarian show that was created by Washington on 23 February exposed those who generally are behind the scenes. All have come to center stage. It is now perfectly clear that Washington's sole aim in Venezuela was not resolving the problems of Venezuela, not caring for the people, but regime change, including with threats to do so via foreign intervention. The fact that this is being done in contravention of the UN Charter, international law, and civilized norms is of no concern to the authors whatsoever. Disrespect for these core principles of international relations has long become a norm for the United States. They simply don't even pay attention to that. Let us, to conclude, have an experiment. 21 February, a U.S. delegation proposed a text elements for the press on the events in Haiti, which all members of the Security Council unanimously supported. If I may, I will read out this brief document. Members of the Security Council expressed concern about violent demonstrations and the death of innocent civilians and urged all citizens to express themselves peacefully. Members of the Security Council reaffirmed their commitment to working with the people and government of Haiti toward a more secure and prosperous future. Members of the Security Council underscored that it is important for all actors to demonstrate a willingness to engage in good faith in efforts to address Haitian political and socioeconomic issues. My question is as follows. Are the American colleagues willing to adopt as elements of the press of the Security Council a similar text regarding Venezuela? For it's hard not to notice that it touches upon a virtually identical situation. The difference lies solely in the fact that for Haiti, Washington decided to side with the legitimate authority, at least for now. For some reason, we doubt the response to this, but we would like to hear it uttered by U.S. colleagues. We will circulate this document amongst members of the Security Council. Thank you.